Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. And my guest today is Erik Lomen. And Erik is the owner-operator at Maine Cap N Stem, a certified organic supplier of commercial-grade, ready-to-fruit substrate and spawn. Erik, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Tell me a little bit about, your first experience with mushrooms.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think I hated mushrooms as a kid, which is really pretty predominantly normal in the United States.
Yeah.
And as soon as I sort of had an inkling for any of the psychedelic side, I think I realized that there were other mushrooms other than edible, soup can mushrooms. And then I think somewhere along the lines, I just started really sort of finding little articles here or there and sort of realizing that the mushroom world was a lot bigger and longer lasting than I thought. When you find these articles from the 50s or little like cutout advertisements of a shiitake farm in Fall River, Mass.
Yeah.
From, the late 50s, early 60s, you're like, this has been around a while. This is interesting. And these are mushrooms I've never heard of.
Well, back then the technology must have been so different.
You would think so, right? And then my business partner, Christopher, his wife, sent me this video of it had to be like the 40s, 50s in Kennett Square in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And essentially they're doing the same thing we're still doing in terms of expanding and inoculating. The process really has never changed, And I think that's really interesting. So the mushrooms look different. More people are becoming cognizant of the varieties, but the process to how you do things technologically speaking is the same. It's everything else around the ether of cultivation that really is starting to change, which is cool.
Yeah, the technology in the grow rooms, and I think the substrates have changed a little bit. And varieties too are starting to change, which is kind of fun because we're seeing some new strains pop up.
Yeah, which is like what everybody asks every day from our side is, what do you got new?
And you're like, well,
board easy. Yeah.
So talk to me about when you actually were in business growing mushrooms. What was that? What was it like? Was there a specific date, or was it like, oh, people are buying our stuff and now we're actually doing this?
Yeah, my late wife and I had moved up to Portland in 2009 to 2010, somewhere right around there. That's when we began sort of in conjunction, like researching and reading about growing mushrooms and on like the gourmet level. And it immediately was sort of real to us. And we're like, this is something we could do. So we sold everything we owned in an effort to just get on the road, travel, kind of like do the, hitchhike around and farm thing. And we ended up at a farm out in Chino Valley in Arizona. And it was just a couple who sort of came from the valley, from the pharmaceutical world and from the tech world, and had noticed that we were sort of researching and reading about different, forms of mushroom cultivation, different books and such. And they basically just gave us the go ahead. And then it was really, it was just Roger Rabbit and the Shroomery and some books, but they're kind of hard to find. And within a year, we had set up a facility there, and we're starting to grow. And that would have been like 2011 into 12. And that was the first sort of iteration of like, and through the Myco Wizards podcast, I've been like really realizing I'm finding all of these weird connection points. Brooks from Far West Fungi was at Aloha at the time. Joey Schlegel from Mana Mushrooms in Aloha was out there at the time. None of us knew one another. I was ordering cultures from Aloha because they were the only place to go to,
Yeah.
But we didn't know one another. And now, like years and years later, you're like, wow, we're in the same sort of geographical location at the same time, getting into the same stuff,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's great to see that.
Yeah.
So you started growing mushrooms, and what were your sales outlets for at that point?
At that point, it was merely just like small, tiny versions of what can we grow. At the time, it was like hard to find anything but arborists in that area who could
Mm,
give you chips, and you just figure out what to do. So very quickly, I got out of Arizona and sort of left them with a pretty well working farm. And we came back to Maine, and I met my now business partner Christopher, and that's the first iteration really for us on a commercial scale was just getting straw and pasteurizing straw, beginning to make a few blocks on the back porch of this big studio building in downtown Portland, Maine. And we just literally grew them and just started selling them. It's the
mhm.
same thing everybody goes through where they just enter the back door of a kitchen like a freak with mushrooms, and they're like, "This is what I got," and the
Yeah.
chef's like, either get the hell out of here or come on in.
Exactly. So that's kind of like, because I've called a couple places and we've had successes here and there, but you think
Yeah.
it's I gotta just go in the back door.
Yeah, yeah, you do.
Yeah. And this time, like we used to do that when we were farming upstate New York, but now with the whole COVID thing, like it's
Yeah.
kind of like you're a little bit more like, are they gonna kick you out? They're gonna arrest you and send you back in. So
Well, even back then, like I was a little conniving about it, like not in a crazy way, but I got a
yeah.
job for driving for Native Maine, which is just like a local produce company up in Maine.
Oh,
And
cool.
so I was just like keeping notes of who was buying mushrooms in and from where. And then I would like go find the supposed farms, and I'd be like, "You're not cultivating anything. You're just buying stuff in and
Yeah.
then acting as a distributor essentially." And that was the list. It was this growing list of farms, and at the same
Hmm.
time, North Spore was coming up, Mousom was coming up, and there was a company called Bountiful, and Erik Milligan from New Hampshire Mushroom Company was there as well. So we all started to like coalesce around this like northern New England area, and then just began, hustling mushrooms in any avenue that we could, and
Yeah.
not coming up against one another at first whatsoever. So
Yeah. So it's like a wide open market.
wide. Yeah, we all had the question back in that sort of like 2008 to 2014 era of like, why are there no mushrooms at farmers markets? We thought there was a reason, but
Yeah.
truly just because nobody was cultivating them in that period.
Yeah. And now people are, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
All right. So then you kind of grew, and then you started offering, the regular fruit bags, and then in 2016 you stopped selling mushrooms.
Yeah.
You just found that you were better suited to be selling bags or blocks.
Yeah, we sort of came up against this pivot point where we had to be out of a building. We sort of had grown out of the basement, expanded into this 3,000 square foot facility in Westbrook, Maine, and we had pulled in a third business partner at the time, and he was doing all the marketing. I'm sorry, the markets and the sales and the restaurants and the shaking hands and kissing
Yeah.
babies shenanigans, and I was just cultivating. And Christopher in the background was sort of like helping us to just like get any financing for expansion or anything like that. And the three of us just like hustled the daylights out of the block side, which
Hmm.
come to find we were the only people really in this area besides Erik Milligan at New Hampshire who focused solely on these sawdust based blocks. And at the time, we didn't use soybean hulls, we didn't
Yeah.
even use wheat middlings or anything like that. It was just sawdust as best we could find it and some sort of nitrogen additive like bran, if we could find it. It was even hard to
Yeah.
find back then. And we eventually got to this weird point doing everything spore to store where I had this like lab set up in my house, and I'd have pressure cookers running off the, stove all night, just making spawn to go drive trucks, in the early morning to come back to just like grow all day long. And
Wow.
I think eventually I got in a car accident, and I was exhausted. My nephew just came up to visit, and we heard that the space below us was turning into like something else, and they wanted to kick us out. And we are like, we got to get gone. So we literally contacted Mousom Valley Mushrooms and North Spore, and I forget there's a couple others in there. And they're like, I was like, you just want to buy our inventory because we got to make a move.
Yeah.
And we found this place up in Gardner, Maine. So we accidentally started really selling blocks just to get rid of it. And then
Aha.
we got up to Gardner, Maine, and absolutely no intention of not growing mushrooms. We had all the designs and layout for
Yeah.
this now 30,000 square foot facility for fruit rooms, and we just never built them. we just kept growing blocks, and people just kept coming at us for blocks because we were the first and only company that would really just offer certified organic, ready to fruit substrate on smaller, scale.
Yeah, because you're not the competition, but the other people would have been coming out of kind of square doing the specialty mushrooms, and they probably
Yeah.
weren't certified.
No, and frankly, at the time, they didn't care. Like, there's not enough money to coalesce this
Yeah.
sales pitch or concept or product value to many small farms. And my business partner Christopher comes from like the art world. He ran Space Gallery, these sort of nonprofit, multidisciplinary artists all circulating in an area, figuring out how to create community and cultivate these small decentralized events and concepts and groups. It's the same stuff for us. We really want to grow that decentralized small mushroom farm network, and we really want to see people succeed on a small and big scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was accidental, man.
Yeah. Okay. So at that time, how many blocks a week were you producing?
Oh man, I think we could fit like 150 to 250 in our first steam box, which was run on one or two of those like crazy Chinese steam generators that like nearly burned your house down because nobody ever wired them right, and they had that stupid button that you'd have to push every hour to get it to like pull steam out for an hour.
Yeah.
And it was like 16, 17-hour runs, and it was exhausting. So we got up here, we were doing the same thing, and eventually we realized we were not going to grow any mushrooms anymore. And we realized there was a business marketing strategy in there. And the farms that were buying in substrate from us at the time, I think we were producing 250 to 500 blocks a week, somewhere in there.
Yep.
And that became like gone instantaneously. And we just had no intention of fruiting after a while because people were just continuing to work with our substrate. And we realized they were sticking around. We didn't think that was a viable option. We were like, these people are all going to disappear,
Yeah. Okay. So you're doing that, but then eventually you went into the spawn, and I think that was like 2019, 2020, you built the entire spawn lab. What did that entail?
It was a crazy time, man. Let's see, we figured out by about then that North Spore, for instance, wasn't going to be able to keep up with the demand and the quality that we were after. Not to speak poorly about their spawn at all. Their market was heavily pushing towards direct to consumer sales, people who wanted to buy a single bag. And we needed something that was a little more specific to the consistency at which we needed to cultivate these varieties to not have contamination that was triggered by spawn. And I think by the time we were selling 2,000 to 3,000 blocks per week, we got to that point in 2018 or 19, where I said, we got to pull the trigger and we got to figure out how to make our own spawn because it's not going to happen any other way. We reached out to Magda and Casper at Mycelia around that point, and simultaneously it was like this weird shift. It was like sometime, in this like weird avenue of contemplating doing spawn, but realizing how large of an undertaking it was, that my wife decided she's going to head out to Arizona and go to school for motorcycle mechanics, because we've always been into riding bikes. And that was sort of her departure from this world. And she just, she'd been in it. We'd been building this thing, working with one another, living with one another, cooking with one another, eating with one another every single day, and had been together at that point for over a decade. And and she went out to Arizona. So 4 months go by. We're just started planning the initial attack of like, how do we do this? How do we get spawn underway? And then she got sick out in Arizona, so I had to leave and head out there to take care of her for 4 months before we came back here. And by the time I got back, pretty much our spawn director, Tyler Crawford, and Mark, our third business partner, had just sort of like laid it out. And they were like, look, we got to do this. And I was like, yep, we got to do this. Came back and just started going. And that process was insane. The initial sort of catalyst was to send Tyler to Belgium to work with Casper and Magda at Mycelia. At the time, they were like the cutting edge. They really still are in a lot of respects. So we spent a lot of time out there, or Tyler spent a lot of time out there really just investigating what they were doing, how they were doing it. They helped us draft up sort of the floor plan, the flow, all of the ins and outs of every little facet that nobody does in the spawn industry in the States.
Yeah.
From vacuum pulse sterilization systems and making use of these large industrial pharmaceutical sterilizers to whatever the case may be. We sort of really, use their insight to develop our facility. And we got lucky. We found used pieces of equipment, new stuff, and we just we just jammed into it.
Yeah. Because I'm sure that kind of equipment's not cheap.
It's not. I mean, you've talked to Eric Myers,
Yeah.
and you've probably seen his trials and tribulations with his
Oh
his
gosh, yeah.
autoclave. It's not normal for somebody like of a civilian level to operate a piece of machinery like that.
Yeah.
But we all fall under this odd sort of covenant of, I guess it's like an odd sort of factor of farming and having a USDA product. So you can be a boiler operator, you can be a sterilizer operator. It's very odd. So, the world leaves us alone to sort of make these strange mycelial masses.
Yes, which is great, because otherwise it's well, like right now I've talked about it before on the podcast, but we're right in the middle of going through 2 development plans with our city for retail space and then the farm. The farm went through relatively easily. The retail space has literally just been a nightmare, an absolute I'm laying awake every morning at 2 a.m. thinking about this nightmare that's on our plate, and just the rising costs. They now want to pave the parking lot, and of course I won't do asphalt because I hate asphalt with a vengeance. So it's
not very farmy.
No, it's got to be. So the only thing I'll settle for, that's what they approve would be cement, which is expensive. So no, it's but to your point, recently I got an email from the city manager basically saying, oh, just wanted to let you know that your excavation work, which you started 3 days ago, is legal and compliant. Because anything else in town, non-agriculture, would have had to pull a permit and would have had to do all the silt fences and all that kind of stuff. But as agriculture, we don't. And I was really actually interested, because when you think about it, when you plow a field, that's a heck of a lot more disturbance than any of these contractors do. And when they're like doing a house,
it really is.
But it's just so different how they treat agriculture in this country compared to, commercial, which is good on one aspect. But on one aspect, obviously the more tillage we have, the worse we are off as a nation. But
well, that's where you have this like pretty great push for there to be vertical farms, and things that mushroom farming is vertical by its nature. If you don't go up with real estate, you're really missing the point. And farming in general has sort of started to approach that, on a small scale, and it'll get a lot bigger in short order. And I think that's when those regulations are going to come in and really create chaos. Food is not a cash crop. This isn't, IT land of making apps and whatever makes a ton of money off of nothing now.
I mean, and the problem is when you try to push it that way, that's when the quality of the food drops dramatically. I mean, you look at the cost of food in, let's say, Italy, and just the artisanal aspect of that. And you pay for it because the amount of hours and time that's gone into that. But then you move to the US and like these CAFOs and just the sterility, just the repeatability, and the empty calories.
And mushroom cultivation has this absurd sense of sterility that is necessary on a lot of platforms and a lot of reasons and levels. But you go into a meat packing manufacturer, you go to any of these other like strange places around the world, and you're like, where's the filters? Where are the where's the cleaning protocols? They're not there. It's just pig's blood and chaos, And it's very strange to come from this world where automatically we have to be extremely clean, careful, and sterile. And the rest of the world's like, you just put an expiration date on it. Who cares?
So but dive into that a little bit, because that is something that, when I started playing around with mushrooms, I was like, oh, we've got to be really sterile. And, obviously you're trying to keep the trikes out of the fruiting rooms and all that. Now, once you introduce the spawn, it's not as important if you have a strong strain, but still, it's definitely something you don't want to have any contaminants in.
I think it's really interesting that coming from the block world versus like the straw log world or
Yeah.
these large open beds, the cultivation of mushrooms and the level of contaminants come with how big you're going. You know, the
Mm.
bigger you go, the wider the variables, the more like neurospora can take out an entire farm, as opposed to on a small scale, you see it and you can rid your room of it pretty fast and be done with it.
Yeah.
So it becomes orders of magnitude in terms of sterility that really are essential for those, setups to get a good substrate, like you're saying. So that's why we poured as much concentration, time, money, and effort into spawn as we could, because we didn't see it being done here on the
Mhm.
bigger scale, on the smaller scale. I mean, I don't know how many people out there have like ordered boxes of spawn from Lambert and it just comes like smashed to shit with like, neurospora and trick growing out of it.
Oh gosh.
And it has just like a label on the side that basically is a million words saying like, screw you, we don't care. That's
Yeah.
literally written on the box. We just didn't want to take that approach, but we wanted the highest quality of spawn possible. So it's sort of become this interesting balance of like how far do you have to go for sterility purposes. And I think spawn is the utmost important side. Substrate, it really depends upon where you're going with it and how much
Yeah.
you're doing. But to be fair, we keep everything as sterile and as clean and HEPA filtered as possible, and overpressured as possible, just
Yeah.
because you can't control people past a point.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because you look at the block culture and then you look at the guy we had in our summit. I'm forgetting his name, but he was just a guy that had he had all it in the woods. Um, and it was just blew me away because it was completely like no sterility at all. It was
Yeah.
just, okay, a log, I'm a drill, put a little bit of wax on it and kick them out there and they grow. If they grow, if they don't, they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was his full-time living and a little tiny hauler in the back in Kentucky.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, because you look at that side of things, but then you look at, where you guys come from. And obviously it comes down to just the intenseness of the production and the yields you're going for. So he obviously is seeing much, much lower yields.
Yeah.
And obviously if the world was to end, or something crazy was to happen,
Crazy.
he would still be producing mushrooms for a year, where all of us we wouldn't be able to run our autoclave. So
Yeah, it's totally true. Well, and I think that there's a large portion of the people in the mushroom world today who are extremely sensitive to that, and I respect it full on and foremost. That if you want to do things on a very, very low tech scale, you should. I think it's super important to do those things and to know how they're done. But you look at the cost, and you look at the sort of efficiency behind the food security that some of the companies like us are after.
yeah,
And I'm less concerned about doomsday and zombies and the apocalypse, and more about when a freak storm happens or the next Katrina happens.
yeah,
How in the hell do you consider food security just getting food from over here to over here? That's not food security. That's not even sustainable in any way, shape, or form. Look at what just happened in Texas.
oh yeah, yeah,
So if you sort of look at these things from a survivability standpoint, sure. Should every single person grow some form of food in their house? Yeah.
yeah.
But in terms of the amount
And
of
they should be fruiting blocks of
food,
mushrooms from you guys under the sink.
right. Why not, man? Why not? And I think there's going to be a larger push for that. We've already seen it through
Yeah,
COVID. A number
yeah,
of us who accidentally had blocks online during like that COVID sort of beginnings were just like, oh shit. This
yeah,
is going to become a thing, and
yeah.
a lot of farms blew up from it, and it was really interesting to see those sales carry a lot of people through the early days of that struggle.
Yeah.
So,
So let's talk a little bit about your marketing. So at the beginning, you were just hustling the mushrooms, the back of the restaurants. But once you start producing blocks, I'm sure that changed. Your marketing completely changed.
well, it didn't. It didn't. Like when you're the mushroom people, they don't even like some dude has your number in a kitchen and then passes it on. In kitchen towns like Portland, the chefs just
Yeah.
circulate from one restaurant to another. Oh, I got too drunk there and they kick me out. Now I work over here, and they
Yeah.
carry your mushrooms with them, so they leave
Yes.
a trail of products wherever they go, and you're the dude still supplying them. so
Yeah.
So we were at that point at which like we just knew all the chefs, we knew all the restaurants, and we were supplying everybody and anybody, farmers markets, all the way through to the, people just coming by the farm. And then at some point, we thought that there would be this large monumental switch where we'd have to really start marketing heavily towards people who wanted blocks. And
Yeah.
it really just turned into no, like everybody knew who we were because we were the only ones doing it,
Yeah.
It was very strange. And even now with people sort of dipping into that world, Mossy Creek was there right before us in terms of selling blocks. TR came in, Erik started slinging blocks, Far West Fungi, and then KSS came out with their sort of
Yeah.
organic option. And it became an option. It became a
Yeah.
real thing that before us, there was this propensity to be like, if you don't do it spore to store, you ain't shit. And it really just wasn't true. It was like, you really can just buy a portion of this in. We have 3 separate business models here. We got culture preservation and spawn,
Yeah.
substrate development and fruiting, and then fresh mushroom sales and distribution. So if you pick one of those and go after them, whichever your heart desires, you
Yeah.
can specialize. And through that like early days of specialization, we found that people just kept coming to us because they found us as an option.
Yeah.
It was a very small world back even just in 2016. Now
Yeah.
it's massive. You go on Instagram and it's like a 20 new farms a day. You're like, how much more ridiculous can some of these farm names get? But but
Yeah.
it's fascinating. Yeah.
Well, I think the attraction, obviously there's always that attraction for growing things, but the thing about
Yeah.
mushrooms is they're so fast. Is
Yeah.
like literally, I mean, if you have a hot room and it's the hours go by and things change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we run like a 2-week production cycle. We have some really big orders every 2 weeks. And so the week between we run about 50 degrees and then we
Yeah.
bump the temperature to 60 about 7 days before we want to start. And then they really push them. And so that's how we're running our production, but it's just so interesting to see the difference from 50 to 60 degrees and the speed of growth.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. Like on a cultivation side, in terms of incubation versus fruiting, one of the biggest conversations I get into with people on consultation calls are basically new people who will they'll see like Michael from Southwest Mushrooms just jamming these like guerrilla grow tents and like converting their cannabis grows to mushroom grows. And they call with so many questions, and there's a large learning curve there when you're taking these designs and sort of flipping them over to do something completely different. But there's also just these weird entrances to that sort of world that people are allowed to get into now, that I think allow them to just kind of like grow and just do their own thing on a very small scale, which is it's amazing.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is having access to ready to fruit blocks, or at least sterilized stuff. So what we do is we colonize and then fruit. So the blocks come in just basically inoculated for us.
Oh, cool.
Which works actually really good. It's one extra step for us, but the price break is there enough for us to make it work.
Yeah.
But I mean, that has eliminated $20,000 worth of equipment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's made basically it's made us be able to enter the space for a fraction of the cost and support another local farmers. So
totally.
Yeah. So let's talk through, we talked about the marketing that obviously the part of this, the reason why people came back is your quality, is because you just have second to none quality on everything you guys produce.
Well, thanks, man. Yeah. We try hard. It's quality.
Yeah.
Us. We're in our whole business model is like maintain customers. That's
Yeah.
If we didn't maintain them, it would be rough.
Yeah. And I've actually left other people in the industry because that very thing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think, and you say like, I don't have to market, but your marketing is that customer service that, if you need something, okay, just call Erik at Cap N Stem because they got the quality and they're going to take care of you.
Yeah, that's sort of where we've turned it around now. And we're using that Myco Wizards podcast, which is just conversations between mushroom farmers. There's no, ifs, ands, or rhymes or reasons or anything about it. It's just like conversational. So you have these 4-hour conversations, these 1-hour conversations, whatever they are, and they're being put out there to these, plentiful amount of farmers that are erupting out of seemingly thin air and getting into it. And they all of a sudden realize that like, you don't have to be crazy to get into this. You got to be mildly nuts because you're an entrepreneur at heart, and like you're not normal.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you have this like wall to bounce off of, and most of us mushroom farmers are pretty hermetic. We hide and we just work and we innovate and we just grow. We don't care about like the world around us at large all the time, because it's a very inward process. There's many variables to really control. And this like version of a podcast that we've been able to put out seems to be driving people back towards us as we help to sort of spread the word of other mushroom farms, what they're about, what they're doing. And in turn, they come back to us to be able to get spawn and get started, or get blocks and get started. So that's our real first step into marketing. It really is.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay. So you have 4-hour episodes.
Yeah, it's obnoxious. Like if you want to listen to Eric Milligan tell the best jokes in the world for 4 hours, it's like it's the greatest podcast for that.
All right,
I'm intrigued. I didn't know, man. I started this thing like in my like she shed of a spot back here in the motorcycle shop, and I was like, this is going to be really strange. Like I had no idea where these conversations were going to go. I don't know how much you sort of have evolved in your podcast adventure, but it's been weird. Like I've had, 50% of the people will be like, I have no idea what I just said. Can I listen to that before you send it out? And you're like, oh, sure. Like I didn't anticipate any of this stuff. I was just like, oh, cool. Like these are weird conversations. And I'm like a blank slate. I'll say anything. I don't care. And I own whatever I say. And even if it makes me blush, but it's still, I just speak from the heart when it comes to that stuff. And I really appreciate what these farms are just doing, whether they're new or whether they're old. They offer something integral. And a lot of us in this mushroom world have had this idea that if we could somehow map the entirety of these farms and help them gain exposure, then we're sort of growing as a whole. And we're not at this like pinnacle point of like, I'm out competing you and you're going down. Cause I don't feel that way. And I know a lot of the farms that I spend a lot of time talking with don't feel that way.
Yeah. Well, I think and again, it always helps to have a villain.
Yeah.
And for us, the villain is just big mushroom producing, is that,
Right.
that, the poor quality. I mean, like the one thing we repeatedly get from customers is, oh my gosh, this was so different than what I buy in the store. Yeah. And it's because it is. They're so much fresher. They're just completely different types. So having that aspect out there is, that to us is, and obviously still like, I find, many people in that industry are still very helpful. And so, but I think the thing is that people just need to eat more mushrooms because there's such a new thing on the landscape of food.
They really are. And they're becoming integral to the value added stuff too, whether it's like, vegan or vegetarian options, all the way through to just like protein fillers in frozen foods you never even know were there, they're just there now because it's an option and it's a commodity. So it's a rare one still, and it's still growing, but the United States alone just eats like 1% of the world's population or world's mushroom. So it's still got so much growth potential. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And I think it's just an education thing, because that's the number one question we get is, what do I do with them? So that's why the recipes and pushing and just like showing people how to cook them and integrate them. And because you can put them in so many different things. Yeah.
That's totally true. I miss that. I miss that interaction at like a farmer's market level. It's obnoxious past the point when you're dealing with the same people, like asking you for cubes, or they ask what this is and you're like, it's reishi. You just don't want to answer the same questions over and over. But there's something that you lose when you get into this side of the world where you're like a supplier of raw materials at this point. Yeah. So,
well, you lose some of the wonder.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's one of the reasons where we're back into it, is because we just love that interaction. And it's really cool for the kids, because we have a 6-year-old now and almost a 4-year-old.
Nice.
And just them going out every day. Like today, we were weeding strawberries. Well, we've been weeding strawberries it's a filler job. So it needs to be done in the spring. So, over the last couple of days, we've been, hacking away at it. Yeah. Or our farm manager has been. I haven't been doing too much. But they found a strawberry already. And I don't even know, that thing must have bloomed in like January and under snow. I don't know how it happened.
Deadheaded it, man. Yeah.
But like the kids, like today, they just ran out. Both of them were like peering down over it, checking on it, looking at it. And, that's the thing I think that consumers have some of that aspect of things into them. Obviously, kids display it so much more innocently, and they just don't care.
Yeah, they don't. They're just full of wonder.
Yeah, but getting back to that of like educating I mean, that's the one thing people love to do when they come out to the farm. They just want to walk in the mushroom room and check, and like, this is how they grow.
Yeah.
And this is that kind, and this is what they smell like.
Yeah.
Because it's got that musty, cool smell in there. And so they're fascinated by all that aspect of things.
Well, it's a strange environment for a child, right? Like we're used to living in these like hyper air conditioned, orchestrated, organized dinners on the run, going to, you have your whole day orchestrated and planned. And I think innately children know that like when you go into a fruit room, the variables are aplenty, from that like foggy craziness to the fans, to the lights, to all of the organisms. It doesn't feel anything but otherworldly. So they get so stoked on it, and it's so cool to watch. I remember watching it with my late wife's nieces and nephews. They would just run in there like a bat out of hell, just like stoked, you know. I was like, cool, free harvesters for the day.
Yes. Put them on the shiitakes.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, don't give them scissors. No, they're fork.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. And I think too, that's the one thing that the small farm movement can work on, is really sharing those stories. I see it, like we see some great production, but let's get the cameras out. Let's just share online what's going on and what it looks like. And because I think that's the major difference between the small scale farm and the industrial farm, is the people and the aspect of just seeing it from the farmer's eye.
Yeah, it's so true, man. Yeah, you kind of lose touch with that a little bit when you're so hyper focused on the variable stuff. But yeah, it all comes back to farming. I remember having a couple interactions with a few different farmers at like the Portland Farmers Market. Not to like mention farm names, but they clearly looked at us like, you're not farmers. You know, they were like, why in the hell are you here? It was like the undertone, because it was like we weren't overall wearing like super dirty carrot, yielding cabbage heads. So I was like, this shit is still food, and it's very hard to grow. Like, I'm sure like Elliot Coleman would be proud that you're mad at me, but like, for real, like, so there's this like hostility in the early days towards mushroom cultivation as the only thing on the table, which I think is why the varieties erupted when these small decentralized farms started getting into the markets, because they had to have variety. They had to,
Yeah, you had to have a reason for them to come back the next week and try something else.
Yeah, you really did, man. It's true. And people still do now.
Yeah.
Hey, thriving farmers, have you checked us out on YouTube lately? We have a bunch of new content there, including a few rants by me. I want to tell you, you don't want to miss them. I actually go rant about, some of the problems I see in our space and some of the challenges I see farmers facing. So go check that out. We've got instructional videos over there as well. Talk about setting up our new farm here in Ohio and all the steps we're going to do that, as well as just tutorials and tips on best practices for all sorts of things on the farm. So go ahead, check over at Growing Farmers on YouTube and see the new content we put together for you.
All right, let's move into you've done mushrooms for a long time now. You've talked, you've done a ton of consultations. What would be your advice for someone getting into let's say they're just starting out? What are 3 things they need to know?
In terms of like business in general, right? I often see these early off excited farmers who are enthralled by the idea of capital gain from growing mushrooms. And the reality check there is really reminding them that this is 50% of the work has been done on our side, but you still have 50% of the work to do. And that's 7-day-a-week work. It's not like we made your life that much easier. We just made it less expensive and a little easier. You still need to like pay attention to this stuff. And I think the crazier conversations I have are with couple farmers, and I'm like, do you guys like one another enough to do this? Like, in all seriousness, because you're gonna see one another way too much if you're going into it together. And you have to have 100% of a A-OK attitude towards like just working 7 days a week and sleeping at the farm or whatever it takes. Stuff breaks,
Yeah.
So that's number one for sure.
Is put in the work and realize it's not the pie in the sky. It's not, easy gig. It's something you have to be willing to do every single day.
Yeah, this isn't weed 20 years ago. This is mushrooms in the 21st century. You're growing lettuce, man. It's funny shapes of water at the end of the day. So it's just all it is, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the number one thing I tend to just say now, especially for like people who are extremely green in terms of they're stoked, and they're really into it. And the other thing is to just not the other main thing I really try to get across to people is to not take everything all at once. Like really step into this slow and step into it slow, but also measure your value from the beginning. There's so many farms out there who have this propensity initially to like look up the whatever it is, the price on a national scale for oyster mushrooms, and they're like, cool, I can sell this for $3.50 a pound. And it's like, no, you can sell it for $20 a pound. Nobody is gonna second guess you. Nobody is gonna even ask a question. Start higher, but don't start higher just for the higher reason. Start higher because it's the only way you're going to survive at the end of the day.
Yeah.
People have this weird scalability factor that comes in, and they're not humble enough to support the product that they're actually creating. You really have to like balance those scales and be humble and egotistical enough to know that the value that you're putting in needs to be maintained if you want to keep growing.
So you can't just drop your price to the bottom trying to clean out the market because you never survive.
No. And oftentimes I don't even think that it's a competition related thing. I think it's honestly like, who's going to pay $6 or who's going to pay $10 for mushrooms? I better make it $6. And you're like, dude, no.
Yeah.
Your overhead is enormous. These facilities that crank out like hundreds of thousands of pounds a day, they are getting the $3 or $2 a pound. Like you got to look at the scale here. It's totally different,
It's a commodity compared to a specialty and artisanal food.
Absolutely. And you have to look at it that way. And if you start that from the get-go, you're going to be in a far better position going forward because you can make it work.
What would you give someone who's like advanced in the mushroom, or they're doing mushrooms and maybe they're not sure what things to tweak to go to the next level?
I suppose it depends where they're at. Some of the like more intriguing conversations that like Tyler Crawford, our spawn director, and I will have are with bigger facilities doing value-added products, and they're trying to develop innovative ways to create something in a very streamlined and profit-driven manner, whether it's like the fruit bodies and the organism and ground up for a powder, whatever it is, they're looking for innovation. And I think I always suggest to them that no matter what your scale is, you have to test things out every single day. Like I have a bunch of jugs of different types of chemicals in the back of my car right now that I'll test as soon as this podcast is over, and I'll go into the lab and do it. And I've been doing that every day for the last decade. If you're not constantly testing, innovating, and setting up experiments and controls, you have no momentum, no foot in it, nothing. And you almost become disillusioned and complacent, and you can't, bring in fresh blood, bring in the like cube grower that you knew back in the 80s. They have like knowledge that they're going to just implicitly inject into the conversation. And look elsewhere. You can't be a self-proclaimed expert just because you've been in it for a decade or two or three. You don't know anything. And I say that all the time. I only know what I know, and I just share anything that's anecdotal or evidence-based just to help,
Yeah, exactly. Now, you guys have scaled the business. I think you have like 16 employees now.
Yeah, I think we're 16 or 17 as of Monday.
Yeah. So with that growth, what has been the keys to, making sure you meet the payroll every week, or, or just how does that work?
Yeah, it's nothing I'm familiar with. I come from a family of entrepreneurs and people who work for themselves, but there's a big difference between starting a business that employs people and starting a business that you're just running yourself. You're your own responsibility at that point. When you got people, it has to be at the forefront. It's got to be your motivation for getting up and continuing to do everything to like survey the surroundings. So for me, it's just 100% delegation to people who are vested in this company in a very integral way. Like they're not necessarily tied in on a financial level, but we treat every employee here as if like they have an extreme responsibility to like whatever they're doing, and we treat them as such and they treat us as such. It's so often that I come across business owners who do nothing but like, it doesn't matter, not necessarily in the mushroom world, just
Yeah.
across the board. They're just like, they hate their employees, they treat them like trash, and they're just a cog in the wheel. I don't do that. I talk to everybody. I make sure I know where everybody's at, and I don't have to do their roles because I'm sure that they're doing it. You know,
Yeah.
that's really important to scalability. Is managing your time and putting the right people in the right positions, and continuing to converse with them daily to make sure everything is smooth.
Yeah. Okay. So then, what's your hiring process like?
It's it's been lackadaisical at times, and then other times it's been extremely important that we like vet heavily for like a position. Tyler Crawford, like our spawn director, Alex Winstead, who you should totally talk to from Cascadia Mushrooms. He
Yeah.
called me like out of the blue, and he's like, "Hey, one of my employees is moving to Maine, and you should hire him because I don't want to let him go." And that's enough for me. I was like,
Yeah.
consider him hired, man. You know, not only is Alex a stand-up cat, he's also
Yeah.
like Midwestern sincerity. So I was like, he's not lying.
Yes. Yeah. We interviewed Alex for the summit, and
Oh,
his
right.
mushroom operation just
It's
blows my mind.
fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you know,
Yeah.
he's one of the most humble cats and one of the kindest and most like,
Mhm.
he's open to sharing anything. And so if somebody like him says hire this dude, you're like, sweet.
Yeah.
And then we have other people in this business. Kelsey's our, that's who anybody who
Mhm.
contacts Cap and Stem, she's going to be the one to sort of reach back out. And she getting her position was a very like vetted thing. One of our business partners was heading off for Australia, and we were like, we got to basically fill your role with somebody. This is like almost picking a person to fill an owner's role, and she's taking it on full steam. But man, we interviewed some doozies for like months. It was
Really?
bad.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not as if the job market is like huge up here, but you know how it is now with like Indeed, and you have Monster, and you have all these different
Yeah.
places in which you can sort of go about hiring people. You have to be super careful to like not read too much into a resume. Like pull
Yeah.
people in, even if they just worked at Chick-fil-A in a dentist's office. They probably have way more to offer than the resume says so. And
Yeah.
usually it's like just get a phone interview if somebody like seems right, and be like, okay, you're not insane. And then
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
bring them in for an in-person interview and go from there. That
Yeah.
being said, it's like letting them talk is the best part, because you'll get the nervousness over in the first interview, and then usually in the second interview or by the end of the first one, you can sort of see where they're at. But specifically for the more integral day-to-day like physical jobs
Mhm.
that are very much like the demanding sweeping, folding bags, making spawn, whatever it is, running the kettles, the mixers, the autoclave, those are really put people in the gig for a day and see what happens. And then at the end of the day, ask them, do you like this job? If they say, I don't know, don't hire them,
Yeah.
and be okay with that. It's really about uh, making them certain that they're comfortable. Because how many times have you applied for a job, you have these weird, great interviews, and then you're
Yeah.
like, this job sucks,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we've been hiring heavily this spring. We hired three positions in our online business, and then one position here on the farm, assistant farm manager. And um, the worst job on the farm, I think, is pulling plastic at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
And
Been there, man.
yeah, and so we love the biodegradable stuff, although it's not technically certified organic. But so we're still using the regular old plastic, and we pulled all the plastic we had to this spring. Yes, I think it was yesterday, and got back in the car, and I was talking about, oh man, I'm glad that's done. And our new farm manager, she's like, oh yeah, that was fine. She says, I didn't care. I kind of enjoyed it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow.
See, not everybody's as crazy as the person running the business. And you realize
Yes.
some people really enjoy like doing a job, and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that catches me off guard even still. Some people just want to fold bags. Some people
Yeah.
just want to pack orders and get out and go home and do whatever they do. And that's awesome. That's like, I have to remind myself that if you own the business, you're the crazy person, and not everybody's going to be on your assumed mental level of sort of implanted
Craziness.
assumptions.
Yeah. And well, I think the thing with the business owner, and I think it varies, but I feel like, I think when we first talked, I kind of connected because I was like, oh, he's my level of crazy.
Yeah.
And
yeah, man, it's 7 days. I mean, like, and I say this all the time because it seems absurd and it makes me feel bad at moments, but like, my wife going through like 2 solid years of treatment, I was still at the farm every day, and like, it makes me I feel like a dick on the inside, but like, that's you. She knew that. I knew that. I'm not going to deny what I am, I'm obsessive and like utterly like dug into something, and nothing on the peripheral is going to stop me,
Yeah.
It's about time management at that point when you decide what's important in your life, and you have to be able to pay attention to the things like family, like friends, like other hobbies that aren't going to drive you absolutely batshit when you can't get something to work at the farm.
I like that. Okay, so what other hobbies do you have that keep the kind of like the de-stress?
Oh man, it's the motorcycle thing is huge. I think a lot of people think the podcast thing is a hobby, and I'm like, no, man, this is me keeping my finger on the pulse and remaining like very connected with the farms that I'm part of. Yeah, man, I went to art school, so I still draw every day. I write a lot. I do a lot of like letter writing, which sounds bizarre, but it's a good like, don't wake up and flick through the Instagram feeds all day. And then just taking long motorcycle trips, man. I got a bunch of friends that we just pick a place and go,
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's where it's at, man. And it kind of like bridges the gap between the safety of like, being on a farm, and then you're just like, this could be it,
Yeah. So go back to that time management part, because I think that one's super important for farmers. Is how do you keep track of everything? How do you make sure you focus on the priorities?
Yeah, it's hard, man. Especially as you're a growing business. Like, we've doubled in size every year for the last 7 years.
Yeah.
It makes sense. That's not a rational thing to say to anybody, because they're all like, what are you still doing then? You're like growing. And we're bootstrapping it. We're not like getting, massive investments intentionally. And time management becomes this thing where if people start emailing you, you just have to be organized enough to say, this is the chunk of things that I just put over here for tomorrow. And then I make a list. I'm a list maker when it comes down to it. I was talking
paper list.
Yeah, just literally paper list, typewriter lists, whatever the case may be. You just list these things out and you check them off, or you just crumble them up and throw them away and make a new one. And even if you're rewriting the same stuff on the list, it keeps you inherently focused, and you can keep coming back to it. I'm really like a printed matter fiend and an old school bookbinder at heart. And I just want to make certain that I can like archive, condense, and look back at stuff. Because if you don't know how the hell you got there, you're no help to yourself going forward. There's no navigation tools. So implicitly, like, that organization is how you continue to sort of keep your time management in check. But also just being okay with just like literally shutting your phone off and getting gone for a day or an hour or whatever. That's hard for people, especially, COVID day and age. Everybody's like, gotta be cued in what everybody's doing. No, you don't. Go fish. Man.
Yes. Yeah. Well, for me now, it's more because I like up until this spring, I was pretty much 3/4 of full time in the office.
Yeah.
And now I'm like 50%, if not 40% in the office, and everything else is out time, and just, just going and sitting on the tractor and this, that, and the other.
The fields don't get any smaller, man.
They do not. No. And I've got big plans. Actually, I was sitting with one of the guys in town here. He had something for sale. And anyway, I was talking to him, and I was giving him the 10-year vision. He's like, how are you gonna afford this, man? You're like, where's all this money coming from? It's like,
everybody asks.
I was like, well, it's gonna come someplace, somewhere, sometime. It'll happen, it's gonna take time. But
when you pull in like partners or concepts or ideas, they don't flesh out. My number one thing is, we'll just do it ourselves. Like, I don't care, like nothing is gonna stop people like you and I in that same respect from just doing it. Like, just do the thing.
yeah. Get started.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
What advice would you leave to, new farmers who are, it doesn't have to be a mushroom farmer, but someone who's
Yeah.
like just, getting into the space?
Yeah. It's a hard one. I think at the end of the day, Eric Milligan said this on the Michael Wizards podcast, but he was talking to a farmer at a farmer's market, and he was like, they were asking him about his mushroom farm, and he was saying, it's going. Some days are better than others, and they said, well, whoever this farmer was, he's like, what, farmers typically say each year as you close out and kind of finish for the season, because we're at school teachers at heart for a little while, is you made enough to farm another year.
Mm,
And if you don't look at it like that, you're not going to enjoy it. You're just going to be pissed when stuff starts to really tear itself apart. Because at the end of the day, a motorcycle destroys itself as you're riding it. A car is designed to die. These mushroom farms need a ton of upkeep, and so do regular
mhm.
farms too. So you
Yeah.
just have to enjoy the fragments of whatever it is that you like look back from 30,000 feet and you're like, oh my God, I can see myself. What am I doing? If you're questioning what you're doing, don't do it anymore.
Yeah. So, all right. So let me think about, like, dive into that a little
Sorry, I
bit.
was esoteric as all hell. Sorry.
No. Because I like what you said there. Because I think, obviously we talk about being profitable because profitability in a farm is so important.
Sure.
But I think what you're also saying is the road to get there is going to be filled with twists and turns and broken motorcycles and
Yeah.
fruiting rooms that fry themselves for this or that reason or the other.
Yeah.
And you have to realize that part of the reason why you do this is just you just love the game.
Yeah, it's true. There's I forget the name of the author. If it comes to me, I will say it. But it's this old like samurai guy, and he wrote basically self-help for samurais, which I think
Yes.
is awesome. And it comes along with these like 21 steps or whatever it is, and basically it's getting to all these inherent points that, like, if you don't enjoy like all of these things and the little components that go into them, you're really going to struggle with like anything bigger picture,
Mhm.
because you really like, if somebody comes to me with an issue, I'm not like, I don't have the time for this shenanigans, get out of here. It's
Yeah.
like you pause what you're doing, you figure out how to write it down, and then you just take that for what it is, and you go from there, and then you can come back to what you're doing. It's very much just figure out how to juggle everything,
Mhm.
wear all the hats.
Yes, wear all the hats, and then once you get to then you start scaling and adding
Yeah.
people to start take those hats from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that becomes you can't get resentful at that point when somebody really, messes up, that you've trained or that you've, entrusted with the job. People don't have the ability to really like self monitor their own mistakes. So you
Mhm.
can't say that you wouldn't have made the same mistake that your employee that you entrusted to do something just made. So you have to be very conscious that people are just people, and you can't judge them for anything that they do at
Mhm.
all. You just hope, and then you keep like encouraging them, and then you challenge them a little bit with new things, and eventually these things really tune themselves in, and it seems to work out for me anyways.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right on that with dealing with employees. Is I've definitely been on some farms where I quit, or it just
Oh
was
yeah.
not, because they had no patience for the people working for them, and I
Yeah.
realized that. I mean, just today we were out working on the farm, and we spray painted something first to make exactly where we're supposed to do something,
Yeah.
and then I completely screwed it up. And so now it's going to be a sawzall and some digging to get it
Yeah.
straightened out. But, I could have blamed my employee who was watching the trench, that they were
Right.
supposed to be the one, in charge of that. But it came back to me is that,
Yeah.
and we're like, we don't know how it happened. It just happened,
It
and we're
just
just going to roll
happens.
with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, stuff will happen and stuff will get fried, but
Yeah.
and then I think those points are always a point for learning of how can we make sure this doesn't happen again, or put a process or an SOP into place.
Yeah, for
um,
sure. For sure.
but yeah, that's kind of the important stuff that I think it has to come out of those failure points.
Yeah, it's also how you train the trainers, so to speak. And
Mm,
I'm like not Mr. Zen Buddha Mad Dog. I'd ride motorcycles, drink booze, and get crazy. But
yeah.
I have this like very like I don't, this thing that just, it drives me to sort of be connected to that in some way. And this sort of Taoistic tradition of, you can move quite slow at something, presumably from the outsider's perspective, but be moving faster than anybody else around you. And it's because of the efficiency at which you're moving. And it's as simple as something from folding bags with being very intentional about each like movement to, you know, your literal movement while you're packing pallets. It on a cheap, like industrial level, it's McDonald's kitchens. On a reality check level, it's very much like how you get the most out of your life. Do you wake up every morning struggling for like how you're putting your clothes on and what you're doing, or do you just have an intent to it and do you switch it up purposely? Do you like, you know, navigate your life that way? Some people don't, but I think you can train people to do that in a work sense and automatically, you know.
Yeah. Thinking about moving the tray closer, you know, that even those half steps and quarter steps, you know, repeated enough, it's massive time efficiencies.
There's a burnout factor there for people. And when you can sort of reset their analysis of their surroundings just by instigating these like, you know, easy conversations, it's as simple as safety, you know, don't go too fast, you know, nobody needs to go faster. It's like, just, you know, be safe about it and very intent and specific about it.
Yeah. You don't have to run back and forth 4 times if you bring all the tools the first time.
Right. It's true. That's why all my tools are on a cart with 4 wheels.
Perfect.
Yes.
Lots of concrete.
Yep, for sure.
Well, Erik, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you coming on, hanging out with us. This is always fun chatting with you and seeing what you're up to, and look forward to watching you guys keep scaling and growing and supplying the mushroom industry.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for doing what you're doing. The podcast thing, like I said, is new to me, but what you guys are doing is very cool, and I enjoy tuning into all of them. So keep it up.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, man.
Hey, Thriving Farmers. Next week on the podcast, join me as I interview Woody from Rootbound Farm. Woody farms in his backyard in Maryland, where he grows a wide range of vegetables. He also sells value-added products, including kimchi. They also produce their own soaps, as well as a few other products for the local markets. Now, he recently had a kind of disagreement or discussion, as the way I could call it, with their local city about what they can and can't do in their neighborhood. So he shares about that. We chat about government overreach and keeping small farms thriving in urban environments. So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.